All right, back on five on the floor. Ethan here with Brady. Let me ask you a very simple question that's very loaded. Who's a better basketball player right now? Tyler
Tyler
Hero
Hero.
or Duncan Robinson? Okay.
It's Tyler Hero. This is kind of the point I think it's at with like the recency bias of stuff. Like there's still things that Tyler brings to the table that pushes them over the top against certain matchups. Like the real conversation isn't like who should start. It's like who's going to who or let's just say who should start against certain teams because like that's when I think the case is to be made. Like I think there's certain matchups that benefit the both of them. So that's kind of but Tyler still gets the Tyler still gets the are you feeling differently? Like is
No, I don't actually. I think in a vacuum, I think Tyler Hero is still a better, higher upside player than Duncan Robinson. That's what I'll say. I think that the peak of where Tyler can get to, maybe it's age bias on my part. The fact that Tyler's still just 24 years old, and I feel like there's more growth to be had there, or it's the playmaking that we've seen. There are some areas of Tyler's game that I wish uh, would show more growth. And the one thing that I'm going to point to, and you and I talked about it before the season, it's not defense. I think the limitations on defense we understand. Okay, and I think that they have enough good defensive players on this team. As long as Tyler is competing off the ball, I think they're fine. It's getting to the line. That's the biggest thing with me with Tyler because he is a different kind of player than Duncan, and Duncan does create more gravity than Tyler does. And so if Tyler is going to be taking the ball in the basket, he's got to be getting some foul calls. It just can't be that he's getting swatted all the time, and that's kind of what was happening this year. And you look at the true shooting percentage, which a lot of people point to, that's largely the result of the lack of free throw attempts because he's a good free throw shooter. That's not a problem. He's a very good free throw shooter, obviously, but he doesn't get there enough. And for guards like him, he gets there pretty much less than anybody else. And some of that is on his own physical limitations, and some of it is on the officials not giving him a benefit of the doubt. But either way, the numbers are the numbers, and that's kind of where I'm coming to on this. Like I'm trying to take the emotion out of this, and I'm going to read something here on the air in a second that gets into the emotion of all of this argument. I'm trying to take the emotion out and say, look, I thought Tyler would be sixth man of the year. I said that before the season when he was. I repeatedly said that I don't think Tyler's injuries are his fault, like diving for a loose ball and breaking your hand or stepping on a foot, which is something Jimmy's done. That's not Tyler's fault. I'm just trying to get into the practicality of the situation here. The practicality of the situation is their numbers are better when Duncan starts. They win more when Duncan starts. Other players elevate more playing with Duncan. And there are certain adjustments that need to be made while playing with Tyler that don't need to be made while playing with Duncan. And then the final thing on it is, and again, I haven't stated my decision on this yet, but I'm talking about my thought process. The biggest thing is just availability. Like I don't blame Tyler for not being available, but availability is like Bill Parcells says, like you can't make the team from the tub, right? Like you he has to be out there to see what this looks like, and we're running out of time. That's why my perspective on this has changed. Like there's enough of a sample size with what they look like with Duncan as a starter, and there's enough time that's run out on this season that I think it's finally time to have a conversation that I have not been wanting to have for the past couple of months because I just have said Tyler's gonna be a starter. I'm gonna read this. I'm not gonna read the Twitter handles here, but I sent this one to you when we took a brief break, okay? And this is what I'm talking about, the polarization of this topic. Okay. So I post this poll. So someone tweets, and this is part of the anti-Tyler agenda. Okay. How many times do people have to keep tweeting the stats with Duncan versus Tyler as a starter before it's accepted? The argument to go to Tyler is always rooted in the contractor confidence, basically optics. No one ever gives a basketball reason. His numbers are identical to his six-man season, too. Then, whenever someone who's anti Tyler jumps in, then we get the other side immediately. It's like, I don't know what it is. It's like a bat signal or something like that, right? Okay. It's a boy wonder signal. So here's the response. Basketball reason number one, he's our best shooter. Do you agree with that, by the way, Brady?
I, that's a tough question. That is shout out to Alex, but that is a tough question. Um,
Why are you always asking me the tough questions? Okay, go ahead. I'm sorry.
I mean, Right now, as we're speaking, it might be Duncan. Like, Duncan's probably the better shooter right now, right?
I think again, it depends on what kind of a shooter we're talking about. I think if Tyler devoted himself to just being a catch and shoot player, I think he could shoot at a level that Duncan does.
It's definitely
But
different coverages too that feed into it.
yes,
Like
yes,
Duncan gets attention, but it's different attention. Like it's
right.
hard. It's definitely different gravity.
Well, let's put it this way: Delon Wright, right, who we've had on the podcast and talked to us about this. Like Atlanta, I guess Nate was the coach at the time. Nate McMillan didn't tell DeLon Wright go sick Duncan Robinson during that playoff series. He said go get Tyler Herro, right?
Yeah,
So that
yeah.
is a different level. But it's a different type of respect because Duncan gets a different type of respect, which is the gravity and all that stuff. But
Hmm.
as far as blitzing a guy and trying to get him off his game, there's more of that done to Tyler than there is done to Duncan. In fact, Tyler and I talked about that when we talked about getting Terry, and he talked about liking playing with Terry, and we got to get into Terry here too. But he said that so far, and this was when Tyler was playing, when before Terry got hurt, also when he said other teams are putting their best perimeter defender on me right now, but at some point that will change and that will free me up because he said teams are going to have to respect Terry. But the reality is teams do put their best perimeter defender on Tyler most of the time. They don't necessarily play Duncan quite that way. So I think, again, they're played differently and there needs to be some nuance here. Number two, this is again back to the tweet of the Tyler defender. Number two, defenses have to give him more attention than Duncan. Again, we just discussed that. It kind of works both ways. Three, he leads the team in clutch scoring. I'll say this: that's factually incorrect this year. That has been true at times during Tyler's tenure, but actually Tyler has of their 10 players who played the most minutes this season in the fourth quarter, Tyler has by far the worst shooting percentages. So that has not been, and again, that's fourth quarter nuance, not necessarily just the last 6 minutes, but Duncan has the best, by the way. So that's just again, I'm trying to deal in facts here. That's just not facts. Would you agree that he's a better clutch player than Duncan?
Yeah, I would say that. I mean, that's why. I mean, that's why I think this is objective a little bit because when we did our closing lineup thing, like I have Tyler in the closing in like the closing lineup, and you had Duncan. So it's like some of this is situation and everything, but in terms of clutch, like I don't mean to like pull out like negative plays, but like the big conversation a few years ago in that one game seven here in Miami against Boston was those two looks that Duncan had, where a lot of the
Mm-hmm.
conversation on social media was like, oh, Tyler hits those. Like Tyler loves those shots.
Right.
So like in that context specifically, like I don't know. I would lean Duncan. I mean, I would lean
Okay.
Tyler, excuse me.
All right. And then this guy says number four, and this is one of those. There's about five on Twitter. If you say anything it's even remotely, even if it's just statistically based, remotely critical of Tyler, they jump on you immediately. Number four, leads in game winners. Um, is that still true? I don't know for sure. He's certainly up there. There's no question about that. Jimmy's certainly had his share. Bam has had his share too. And again, what are we calling a game winner? Are we just calling it a buzzer beater? Are
Mm.
we calling it like sort of a kill shot? Like Duncan, I thought had the kill shot in the last game, that three that he made. He's made a bunch of those over the years. Max made a bunch of those when he was here. I don't, but it feels like Tyler's made a bunch as well. Maybe not as much as he did early in his Heat tenure, but he's made a bunch. I don't know how to empirically classify game winners. And then five, leads in 3-pointers in the last 3 minutes. I would have to look that up. I can't speak to it. Okay, let me give you the response here. This is from the anti-Tyler. And again, these folks are just as out there on the other side. Okay, it's just
We're
he
debunking a Twitter conversation right now, by the
no,
way.
we are, but this is the debate. Like this is going on a daily basis. I don't know if it's going on with the casual Heat fan, but this is really all that Heat Twitter wants. Now that Jovic is in the starting lineup, like now that we've settled that argument, like and again, Spo's answer to me about the Jovic Bam connection, like I'm convinced Jovic is never coming out of the starting lineup now. Uh, it feels like this is the only thing left, honestly. Okay, so here we go. This is from the anti. He is not, capital letters, our best shooter. He takes 18 shots to give you 20 points. That gets back to what I was saying, where it's the free throw shooting. It's not that he's inefficient overall in his effective field goal percentage, because the 3-point percentage is high, which props that up. That's good, but he makes free throws, but he doesn't get free throws, and that's why sometimes it's again a lot of shots to get a certain number of points. This person says that is not efficient. It's why they never miss him when he's out. Do you agree they never miss him when he's out?
I mean, they missed Tyler against Denver, so I don't know about never, but I mean the track record is that they have gone on runs without him because Jimmy just has the ball in his hands that much more. That it's not really a Tyler versus Duncan thing. It's more of a Tyler versus Jimmy thing. Like it's like him having the ball more. But I mean, like I said, I do think there's certain matchups that they're going to need Tyler. And if to give one example, obviously it was Denver last year.
Okay. And then the next part of this Duncan, Caleb, Hawkes all play better without him when they get the ball more. Now, you're mentioning Jimmy specifically. Do you think that also applies to the three? Those are really the Heat's three core role players, right? Other than Love, Duncan, Caleb, and Hawkins. Do you think they all play better without him because they get the ball
I would say so. I mean, anybody when their usage goes up like that, I would say has a better chance of like Jaime specifically is the one that always sticks out to me that he kind of gets a little bit more reps in the mid post, gets a little bit more opportunity on the ball. Duncan, if Tyler's not playing, obviously he's starting, so he's getting up more shots. And Caleb, I'm not totally sure on. I feel like Caleb plays his role no matter what
more?
next to Tyler. I feel like he actually plays
Yeah,
well with Tyler. Caleb does,
I do
but
too.
Duncan and
I do too.
Jaime, I would agree with.
Okay. And then his true shooting percentage is currently the lowest since his rookie year. That is empirically true. And again, that's the free throw shooting. Or the free throw attempts. And I'm not going to get into the rest of this because this literally just keeps going. It just keeps going, debating the same things that you and I are trying to settle here in maybe a more nuanced fashion. But this plays into all of it, and then we'll talk Terry, which is that there is the basketball part of this, and then there's the optics part of this. Okay, and there are a few things that go into say optics. Okay, one of which is how it looks within your team, how it looks to the players involved, and then how it looks to the rest of the league. And the Heat do need to weigh that stuff. Like that matters. Like you're trying to win a championship, but that is relevant. Okay. It is relevant whether or not, and I know Barry speculated on this today. He wasn't speaking from information, but how it would affect Tyler to go to the bench after he has earned a starting job and been a 20-point scorer in this league and improved in a variety of ways over his, almost 5 seasons with the team. That matters. But like I said, it also matters that Duncan doesn't play as well coming off the bench. The value part of it, all right? If you are looking to make a move in the future, whether or not it is to try to get a star, it seems like that ship has sailed, okay? For whatever reason, the Lillard thing, the Durant thing, I don't know what you can include Tyler with to get a star level third guy. I think it's more likely at this point that Tyler, if he was to be moved, would be moved for pieces, um, sort of like the Heat have done before. We talked about moving Eddie Jones, when he was the third guy with the Shaq Wade build and moving him and picking up Antoine Walker and others in that trade, which was a multitude of trades and free agent signings at once in one offseason. So could you get more size? Could you use Tyler's contract to do that? Could you bring an additional pick that could be used for something else? If you're putting him back on the bench after he's been a starter, could that deflate his value around the league? Perhaps a little bit. I think it's something to consider. I don't think it should be the major thing. But I do think that those things overall matter. But I think the biggest thing that matters at this point, again, is whether or not the team is being elevated by the positions that people are being put into. And I can just tell you that, like, Eric Spoelstra is not going to be he knows the numbers. Like everybody's like, does he know that the team plays better with Duncan in the starting lineup? Yes. Brady, I think he's fully aware of that. Like, but he also told me once that 75% of his job is managing the locker room, managing personalities, managing egos. Okay, so then if that's the case, then I do think that a decision like this, if it was to be Duncan over Tyler, I do think that stuff matters. And so I do think that's something that they have to weigh. In your view, which matters more?
I'm on the side really that like the value part you mentioned, I don't know if that truly matters in my opinion in terms of making that decision because I'm sorry, Eric Spoelstra is not thinking about his trade value when it comes down to playoff time. Like he's going to play who he wants to play and who he thinks is going to win him a playoff game. Like I just don't think they're going to make their decision based off that. And yeah, like while he definitely knows the numbers, definitely can. He said before, like every lineup looks better with Duncan. Like he literally said that about like basically like that's why I think to not to stray off, but like the one case for Duncan is like I like forgetting the numbers, forgetting all of that. Like I feel like he plays better with Jimmy specifically, which is why I think the like that is what leads everybody pointing to this because everything is based around Jimmy at all times, and I think everybody just realizes that he just does play better with Jimmy. It seems like, but what matters more? I mean, I'm just kind of on the point where it's like I really do feel like if Eric Spoelstra thinks that Duncan Robinson should start over Tyler Hero, he'll start him over Tyler Hero. Like he's not like afraid that Tyler's value is going to drop or afraid that he's going to like have to have a tough conversation. Like I really like I'm not really on that side.
He had the conversation with Dragic. I mean, he
Right.
had the conversation with Goran. He had the conversation with Dwayne. And I'm glad you use the word afraid here because I see that creep into social media sometimes when it comes to Spo. Eric Spoelstra, of all coaches in the NBA, with the exception of Greg Popovich, has the least to be afraid of. He just signed an 8-year contract. Okay. He has the total backing. This is like having your CD backed by the U.S. government. He has the total backing of the Heat organization. He has had it since the very beginning. LeBron James tried to get him fired, and Pat said no. So Eric Spoelstra is not afraid to make a tough decision. The fact that he would weigh the human element of this does not make him afraid to make the decision. I want to clarify that because I have seen some of that creeping in here. Spo's afraid to have the talk with Tyler. No, he's not. He had the talks with LeBron. He went at Jimmy during a game. Jimmy Butler, okay? They were going at it. And Spo like relished that situation. Not afraid to have a conversation with Tyler Herro, but I do think you weigh how it affects your locker room, how it affects the players involved, and I think to a degree you weigh the future. Although I agree with you, I don't think that's the major thing. But again, he has the full backing. Okay, it's like the full credit and authority of the United States. Okay, he's fine. Okay, he's a made man in Miami. He's not afraid of benching someone if he has to. I think that the numbers are pointing a certain direction here that have gotten harder to ignore. But with that being said, you said a couple things there, and I want to go back through some of the numbers, not just now, but also the big three. Okay. Um, Last year, Jimmy and Duncan were a minus 4.1 together. Jimmy and Tyler were a plus 4.7. So, yes, this year, it looks a lot better with Jimmy and Duncan. Last year, it didn't. Last year, it looked better with Jimmy and Tyler, or at least
Small
the
sample
numbers.
though with Jimmy and Duncan last year.
It was. And Duncan didn't play particularly well and was coming off an injury and then got benched again. But
Mm-hmm.
I just want to clarify that. The problem with their numbers last year was not Tyler, it was Max. Okay. Max tanked all their numbers. And again, I'm a big Max fan, but I mean, you look at, I mean, all Truce's numbers with everybody on the team were horrible. They were all bad, like across the board. You know, the other guy that did the other two-man combination that was bad last season, the one we love so much, Bam and Duncan, minus 5.3. So last year, when Duncan wasn't playing well or wasn't playing consistently, things didn't look good. Things look better this year because of the way that Duncan has played. So I just want to say sometimes this stuff changes a little bit. Okay. Um, and if you go back 2 seasons ago, 21-22, the Strus numbers with everybody were great. Strus and Tyler even were plus 12.5 when Tyler was coming off the bench. Okay. Bam and Tyler were plus 10.5 2 years ago. Their numbers this year together have not been particularly good. Butler and Herro that year were plus 5.7, etc. Jimmy and Duncan that year were plus 5.1. So even that year, where Duncan was playing better, Butler's numbers were better, slightly better with with Tyler than they were with Duncan. And the one other thing I just want to go back to here is if you go back to the Big Three era, and I had these conversations with Spo during that period of time. LeBron and Dwayne had really good numbers together for the first 3 years. Okay. 10-11, they were plus 12.1. 11-12, they were plus 13.6. Okay. Next year, they were plus 4. In the year that they won 66 games, everybody's numbers were up except our guy Norris. Unfortunately, there was some. I remember Tom Haberstroh writing a bunch of columns about that. The only negative numbers were there. But Bron and Wade were plus 14.4. In the last year of the Big Three, Bron and Wade were plus 6.4. Okay. Which was not great for a team that was elite. Bosch and Bron plus 9.9. Bosch and Wade numbers were also better than Wade and Bron. And I had the conversation with Spo late that year, and he said, he said, if I followed the analytics, if I just followed he said, I see them. If I just follow the analytics, I wouldn't, the way that LeBron and Dwayne were playing together in the playoffs, I wouldn't have played them together much at all. But they're LeBron James and Dwayne Wade, and I'm going to play them. And I'm not saying that Tyler Herro is either of those guys, okay? But what I'm saying is that sometimes Brady, he's going to lean towards the feel of his team and towards getting who he thinks are the best players on the floor, even if the fits, as suggested by the numbers, may not be as good at that point in time. Do you think he should lean more on feel, or do you think he should lean more on this is what the sheet says? You can't play these guys together as much. Make sure you get Duncan out with this guy and Duncan out with that guy and Duncan out with this guy.
Spo started the season at a press conference and he said, talking about like the rest of the league getting better, and said, well, it's a good thing the championship isn't won on paper. And it's like, that's almost the way this is viewed. Like he's not looking at this anything on paper. Like they are just going to continue to kind of push through. So I do think it is feel. I think it's based on a lot of those type of things. Now, like if there was a run before the playoffs, or like if Tyler was to return and things looked ugly and it was getting in the way of Jimmy and he was shooting horribly, then it's time for Spo to evaluate it and probably go to it. But I think the feel for him right now is that when Tyler's healthy, he's going to get back into that starting lineup, especially because even if he wanted to start Duncan, you have to start Tyler just to get these reps with that lineup, because they just don't like it. That literally what I started when I said earlier was the fact that that lineup that we're talking about has not played a minute with Jovic and Terry and Jimmy and Bam. So you almost need to just play him there just to try to figure out how things are going to look. Even in, let's just say hypothetically he was coming off the bench, he's still going to have to play with some of these guys. And the fact that we're doing a whole podcast on like starting lineups and everything, what I feel like, and I say every time, is like it really, to me personally, like the starting lineup thing really doesn't matter that much. Like I understand like the numbers with Duncan starting versus Tyler starting, but it really comes down to Spo mastering his rotations. And like the Duncan Jimmy combo matters to me more than Duncan starting. Like he just has to figure out combos that work, and Duncan and Jimmy have looked really good, which is funny considering the fact that I feel like Jimmy's always screaming at Duncan. And we there was that thing where we used to say that Jimmy hated him or something, but like they legitimately play really well off each other. And part of it is because Duncan just gets out the way. Duncan just gets away from him and lets Jimmy do things and lets him yell at him. So it just works.
Well,
That
this is post Jaylen Brown, Duncan, too. I
right.
noticed in the locker room yesterday, there is better rapport between the two of them this year. I've noticed that it feels like the joking is a little bit more lighthearted than before. From Jimmy to Duncan, it felt a little mean spirited. Like even the thing, the one we always point to is when Duncan had a great game and he kind of he praised Max instead, and it did feel like the usual trolling. It felt like he wanted Max to play more, and we know Max did play more, and Max took Duncan's role. And I understood when I looked back at the numbers from last year. I'll just read this one, and then we're gonna quickly talk about Terry before we close here. Duncan and Max last year were a minus 15.5. Well, no one per 100 possessions. No wonder Spo told me that he decided he could only play one, and that's when he was going to go back to Duncan, but then Duncan got hurt again, and then he stuck with Max. I want to close on Rozier. I do want to mention one more sponsor real quick. Better Edge, use code 5RSN. We mentioned trying to play props in the state of Florida. Better Edge, you still can. It's legal. It's peer-to-peer. So that means you can get your $20 to play by just going to betteredge.com. Use the code 5reasons, which is the number 5 with reasons, or 5RSN. You get $20 to play. You can also participate in all our competitions. All right, we've kind of left one thing out here. Brady, give me the argument for why they can't just play together and the starting lineup.
The defensive side of things, I think, is where you look. Not that Terry is some ball stopper, but I think it's just a different element of speed that he gives you. That you think of. You could probably say the Tyler Duncan case is to be made if it's a playoff move and they move Nico back to the bench. Like if they were to
Right.
start Haywood or Caleb or something like that, like it feels like it's more likely, but it's more traditional to go with Terry and Nico. Like it feels right. So, I mean, that's the case to be made. I mean, to be honest, would the case be that because everybody just thinks of Tyler as this bench player and it's going to come off the bench and just kill second units? Isn't Terry more built for that? Like when I think about it on
Oh
paper
yeah.
of killing other
He-
second units and playing the style that we're discussing, that's more Terry's game than Tyler's game to me. But
I mean, I think a bench core of Rozier, Martin, Jaquez, and Love uh, would be really interesting. Again, 15% of the people polled here, and now we're over 2,000 votes, have Hero Robinson together as their preference. They have made progress. There's no question. They play better together. I think you mentioned what the X factor is here, which is Jovic, and I went through Jovic's numbers today. The duos, he's good with everybody, like literally except the point guards. He was not great with Lowry, and he and Rozier don't have good numbers together. And I think there's actually something to that because I think Jovic is better with the ball in his hands.
yeah,
But the numbers are his number with Caleb, his number with Duncan. They are elite numbers. His numbers with Tyler are very good, but we haven't seen the Jovic Hero Robinson lineup. We haven't seen it, because Jovic was not as much of a factor before, even though now he's started 20 games. Uh, this is where I come down at it, and we'll give our final arguments on this. Nobody is going to listen to us on either side because both sides are too entrenched on this. Okay. I have thought all along, like I said, that Tyler would get his starting job back when he came back, and that he should. I did not think we'd be pressed up into this final quarter of the season and not know when he's returning. I think he's got to get back soon. I just do. I think it's got to be in the next week or so. And I think if it's going to be Hero, Rozier, and Jovic in the starting lineup, they need 2 or 3 weeks to see what that looks like before the playoffs start. And I think if Tyler has any more of an extended absence than that, and this team continues to play well, let's say they win in OKC and Dallas, let's say they beat Denver at home with Duncan. At that point, I don't know how you can make the change. I don't. I think to me, Tyler, you know what would help Tyler's case in all this? Get back at least before the Denver game and do against Denver what we thought he might do against Denver in the finals if he'd gotten back. But again, he didn't play in Denver this year, just missed that game. And we don't know when he's returning. And it's not like it's just going to be seamless because it wasn't seamless before he went out. So I'm giving it about another week to 2 weeks to see if he comes back, what Spo does with Jovic. I think he'll keep him in the starting lineup, how that looks with Rozier if they can all stay healthy. And if it's past that point, to me, if you're rolling with Duncan, you roll with Duncan and you see what it looks like with Tyler coming off the bench.
the problem I would have with that is like with him kind of, because he does need to come back soon because they need him and they need to figure out lineups and everything like that. But the worst thing that could happen is him rushing back because he feels he needs to prove himself. And then now you're back to the no Tyler playoff thing or another injury pops up and now it's more like it's almost like take care of it now. Duncan's in a flow. Forget all this narrative stuff that's out there. Just keep playing your game and figure out when the time comes. But I will say that every time that Tyler Hero has an injury, he has to come back and prove himself. Like, has there been an injury where a time where that hasn't been like that's not the case with a lot of players, and I think that's why we talk about him being polarizing. Like, I understand it. Like, we just made the cases, like we just did it. But it is just wild to me that no matter what, he always has to come back and prove it to like not against other teams, like against it, like his own teammates or like the narrative or anything. Like that's just who Tyler is at this stage.
It's against the narrative, is what it is. And those narratives are not going to go away. And he knows it. He knows it. He even said it before last year. He had to prove it in the playoffs. I think what's different this year is two things have happened. Duncan has become a different beast than he was even prior to last season. And so they have a viable option, okay? Even more viable than Max was. So I think that's part one to it. And I think part two to it is that the Hero Butler Bam connection has not been there. The three of them together when they have played together in what has been a sort of sadly small sample size this year. And I think those two factors and the fact that Tyler's had another, towards the end of the season injury, I think does make it a viable conversation to have at this point. And then you get into the fact that, look, Tyler Herro is a really good young player. He's got a really good future in the league. He's a great draft pick, but the greatest player in franchise history and sacrificed. Another guy who's one of the most beloved players in franchise history sacrificed. And so if he has to, because he's jumping on a moving train that's going the right direction too late in the season, it's just one of those things. Like I said, I think it's at least something to discuss at this point. So I'm giving it another week or two to see how he comes back, and if it's beyond that, then I think you roll with a guy who's rolling. Because to me, Duncan's been a top half of the league two guard this year as a starter, and he's been pretty damn good. All right, thanks to Brady. We tried to cover it as best as we can. Everybody's going to have a problem with us no matter what we said on this. Anyway, thanks to our sponsors, Better Edge, Prize Picks, and Water Cleanup of Florida. We'll try to hit something less controversial next time. Like, will Patty Mills get a minute? Have a good one, everybody.